I'd like to welcome you all to the final event of today's conference, which is a keynote lecture to be delivered by Professor Ron Geaves. I'm delighted that Ron actually accepted our invitation for him to deliver this lecture at this conference in particular, because I'm somewhat familiar with his written oeuvre. And given his particular research interests, his field experiences over many years, and his consistently empathic approach to his work, I really feel that he's eminently qualified to enlighten us today from both a professional as well as a personal perspective. In 2010, Ron published perhaps his most well-known book, both inside and outside of academia, Islam in Victorian Britain, The Life and Times of Abdullah Quilliam, a project which he has described as a gift back to the Muslim community and which led to a stream of lecture invites from Muslim communities across the country. Interestingly, in terms of the theme of this conference, his work on this book profoundly impacted him on a personal level. In an interview published in the Muslim lifestyle magazine Emel, Ron describes how his passion for and level of commitment to this work became almost obsessive, quote unquote. He says, and this is a quote, "The whole of the city of Liverpool was transformed for me, and I began to see the city through the eyes of Quilliam. Buildings that were built after his death or after he left the city disappeared out of my sight," unquote. So much did the biographer begin to embody his work that boundaries, not just between past and present, but also between subject and self, began to blur. Ron confesses that he used to dream of Quilliam. And perhaps even more telling, his patient wife once told him, "I'm not sure who I'm married to anymore, whether I'm actually married to Abdullah Quilliam or Ron Geaves at this point in time." Ladies and gentlemen, I'm immensely honoured and proud to have with us today Professor Ron Geaves, who will deliver the conference's keynote lecture entitled "The Death Pangs of the Insider-Outsider Dichotomy in the Study of Religion." Thank you very much.
Terrifying. You hear yourself read back to you. Now you have to live up to it. Yes, so who am I? I always wonder, did my wife enjoy living with Abdullah Quilliam? But does it constitute adultery? You know? I often ask myself the question, am I an insider or an outsider? And if you're asking me to give you an answer to that question, I'm afraid that is still a work in progress. It certainly reached a point at round about the time when I gave that inaugural lecture in Chester, which got me into a lot of trouble. The right-wing press didn't like it at all. And I received some horrendous hate mail, which went on for about a month, in which I was advised by certain members of the British right wing that I should come out in the open, put my wife in a burqa, and disappear off to Saudi Arabia where I belonged. So, which kind of begs the question that certainly as far as the British right wing are concerned, I am definitely an insider as far as Islam is concerned. And since possibly even of a certain type. And I'm very proud to know that I'm also, and I'll confess it, that I'm up on Jihad Watch as as an enemy of Western society. So, I think the point where I really wondered was when I was doing my research into young Muslim or young British imams, both of the Barelvi and Deobandi groups, and I went to a particular location. In fact, actually, I mean, it's actually the Central Mosque in Birmingham, and they were rather defensive. They weren't quite sure who I was, and one of the imams there, whose name I won't mention, introduced me and basically, in a sense, he took on the gatekeeper role to introduce me as someone who was trustworthy. And prayer time arrived, and I was completely alarmed when he said to me, the imam said to me, "I won't take you up to the mosque for prayer because I'm aware there are sensitivities around your identity. He said, but I'm quite happy to give you the imam's room so that you can pray and maintain your identity as a Muslim. And I suddenly realized, as far as he was concerned, for certain, that I was in that kind of, I guess it's a Sunni position, but it's certainly a Shia position where you can hide your identity. And I was and I wondered to what degree that idea of me was reproduced across the Muslim community and with others. And yet that's interesting, because I've always been very, very clear when asked by Muslims in terms of want to know about me, that kind of perennial question to the researcher, are you a Muslim? I've always been very honest and open that I'm not. But there is within me, I think, things which harmonize with the deepest principles of Islam. And perhaps it's that they pick up on, and I think it's that which I try, I don't always succeed, informs the way I go about this whole issue of insiders and outsiders. And I'll be frank, I don't like it. And I don't like it because I love the concept of Tawheed. And it seems to me that the deepest understanding of Tawheed would not acknowledge an insider and an outsider. It's a move from diversity to unity to oneness wherever possible. And I try my best. I fail miserably as a human being, but I try my best to allow that to inform how I operate. And I think that goes back to and we've heard a lot about the study of Islam, and of course I'm talking about the study of religion here primarily. It goes back to when I first began as a student, a master's student in Leeds, very excited about joining this new project, the Community Religions Project, which was the first attempt really to go out and study Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus as lived religion in the UK, rather than a kind of a textual approach within the study of religion. There were sociologists doing that kind of thing, of course. But and in my master's, I went out and I did this piece of research in Leeds, and it ended up being published. It still, I guess, exists somewhere, called Muslims in Leeds. And naively, I found myself caught. I didn't realize I'd been caught in the politics of the community, which, although everyone I was interviewing first-generation migrants. I've now become one, mind you. I've just moved from England to Wales, so and one of the issues that I didn't realize, thinking I was just interviewing first-generation Muslims who had come to Leeds, was the dynamics of ethnicity in that we'd all, that's every day now. But it was a predominantly Pakistani community, or Pakistani origin community, and one of the key figures who had been one of the absolute pioneer members of that community had been a Bangladeshi, and I was definitely steered away from meeting him because the Pakistanis wanted me to represent the Pakistani story of how the Leeds community had developed. They didn't consciously say to me, don't go and see that person. They just never mentioned he existed. And in the process of my digging down, I never discovered him. But he was alive and well and had been a very active member of the origin of the Leeds community. And later he came when the paper was published, and he was very hurt because he hadn't been represented in his own life work, in the sense of being swept aside. We managed to put it right. I felt very, very upset. Later he became a very, very good friend of mine, and I knew him until his death. But we managed to kind of put a little bit right, because we had a public event at the town hall in Leeds where we celebrated his life work, and the Lord Mayor and everyone gathered. And it was because I couldn't actually rewrite the paper that it had been published. I could do. But it made me realize that in terms of insider-outsider dynamics, it may be in the study of religion, it's one issue if you're studying how you approach text, and that an outsider scholar might have a different view on, or even a different methodology of what they want to achieve of understanding the Quran from someone who is studying the Quran as a devout Muslim. But if you're studying Muslims, there are different issues, because you're dealing with fellow human beings who hurt in the same way that you hurt, and have invested a huge amount of you can say emotional, which have to be respected by the researcher. And I would have been equally hurt, if I had just been left out of the story when I'd given so much of my life to that story. And I guess that early mistake tried to inform how I operated from that day forward. But to come, I guess, to pick up some of the themes that I've been hearing, and I thank you all for your papers, because I think it's absolutely not accurate in the sense that you as scholars need to hear from venerable people like me, for goodness sake. I think venerable people like me, if I have venerable, need to hear from you, because actually it's at that postgraduate level where some of it's where the groundbreaking work takes place. And so thank you all for those papers today, and I loved them all. They were fascinating. I'm going to go back to a quote from Yeats, 1921. "Things break apart, the center cannot hold." And although he wrote that in 1921, I think not only is it a statement of all material life, but I think it's very much a statement for our time. And I think it informs, I think, the whole issue of insider, outsider, and where does an insider begin and where does it end, and where does an outsider begin and where does, that in actual fact, those kind of positions cannot hold. And we've heard that today, I think, in paper after paper after paper, how when we actually enter the domain of the field, we very quickly realize that there are all kinds of problems with this dichotomous view of the world. When I first engaged with the study of religion as an Open University student, the issue of insiders and outsiders actually was year one undergraduate on the course. And I've always taught it year one to my undergraduates as well. And at that time, and I tried to find it, but I couldn't find it. It's one of those things that's so ancient now, it's disappeared. I couldn't even find it with Google searches and everything, and I couldn't find my copy of it either, because there's chaos in my academic world at the moment with the move to Wales, and all my books are in a camper van and or in boxes. But basically, how they looked at it, the Open University, with their World Religions course, it was outlined as the advantages and disadvantages of seekers and scholars. Has anybody ever come across that? Sean?
Before my time.
Before your time, okay. And it was a nice little chart, and it had seekers, scholars, and there was the advantages of being one, there were the advantages, of the other. And I always used to run through that even in recent years, I've run through that with students and said to them, take it apart, deconstruct it, But it's very interesting, because it seemed to me that right from that point we were aware in the study of religion that the claim that it was possible to study religion adequately from a disinterested position was certainly an issue of hot debate, regardless of whether you were a scholar or a seeker. And certainly that issue, and I still get even first year undergraduates still to this day would bring that issue up with me, in the sense that who can understand a religion better, the person inside who practices it and the scholar who doesn't and comes from outside, but gathers a depth of knowledge about that particular tradition. And it seems to me that there are two issues that raise their head immediately, or they certainly did for me, with regard to this kind of disinterested position, the scholar, and this highly engaged position, the seeker. And the first one was that, can anyone be disinterested? Is that a human position? Could you even do disinterested study? I would be bored out of my brains with disinterested study within about 2 months ago, do something else, And the second was that I believe scientific objectivity is no less a construct than religious conviction, which kind of places me, and it seems that, so those questions were very early on in my mind, The second was, in a sense, that I came in. I've got a date now for Things Break Apart, the Centre Cannot Hold, not just in terms of Yeats saying it, but when it started to happen in the UK, because the first paper in this that we got this morning, date gave us 1984, as where this major transformation took place. But I think it took place in many, many arenas of human life in post-Second World War Britain. I came into academia 88, I guess, so. But the transformation, what I came into was a transformation of the British terrain, which was so significant for the student of religion. And we're all a part of that now. And that is the arrival of a pluralist, multi-faith landscape as a result initially of migration and also of religious choice post-Second World War II. You know, and we're all the products of that, unless I'm the product of it. So you've got to be very old not to be the product of it. And it turned the UK itself into this ideal locality for studying religions as lived realities as opposed to textual constructs. And you no longer had to be the anthropologist who got on a plane and went to the Amazon or, you know, desert or wherever you went, because you had this wonderful terrain all around you. I mean, my son is about to go on a field trip at school. He's 11. He's about to go on a field trip to Scandervale in Wales. You know, and this guy. Well, you can laugh, but it just says it sums it all up, doesn't it? Really. I told him I'd done research there, and he was absolutely amazed. So it seems to me that when you study religion as lived realities, another challenge to the old insider-outsider dichotomy immediately occurs. Because as an outsider, and I'm still using the terminology, you can't actually escape depending on the insights of the insiders when you study a particular religion. I mean, you know, because that's your terrain. So for an outsider who's never been through a particular ritual, can only give an account based upon observation and third-party testimony of performing the ritual. Observers may abstract and generalize from sacred texts to try and get insights in the absence of direct experience of the religion as practiced. But questions such as, you know, what does it feel like to perform a ritual? Why did you actually perform the ritual? Can only be answered by insiders. And you can then try as honestly as you can to describe their experience. Because once we start calling for answers based on personal experience or ask for details, and then once you start doing that, you realize the extraordinary variety that exists within a particular tradition that breaks down all the kind of essentialized understandings of Islam or whatever it might be. It could be local, it could be a family custom, it could be, it's very unusual. And I remember having a classic example of this just recently with marking an IBO paper where a student described who I clearly recognized when I looked at the paper that this was a Muslim student, described a Muslim ritual. But it had so many crossovers with Hindu rituals that the person who had marked it had given a very, very low grade. And I looked at it and I knew immediately from my experience in India that particular set of rituals was normative custom for hundreds of thousands of Indian Muslims. And you know, so do you fail the student? who could answer it with that particular, with locality as a part of their answer. Yet we've already seen on other papers that insiders are fallible. And they may have their own reasons for describing the experience that they describe to you in a particular way. And they won't necessarily agree with each other either, so we have all of that to deal with. There's also a further issue of whether the experience of one religion, which comes up in the study of religion, can contribute to your understanding other forms of religion. For example, does personal experience of practice of prayer in one religion make a student more sensitive if you're studying prayer or practices in another religion? Is a Muslim, for example, who prays better qualified to understand a Christian who prays, or a Buddhist who meditates, so on, than, say, a humanist who might not do either of those? Should students who are not members of the religion be considered simply as outsiders, which is what we've done, whether they're agnostics or members of a different religious faith? Would someone standing outside of every religion, but interested in their study, bring more openness and sympathy? So all of these issues come in. If you decide that we shouldn't generalize, and it will depend upon the skill and sensitivity of each student, then you are tacitly accepting that being religious in itself is not a necessary qualification for a student of religion. And the insider-outsider dichotomy collapses in on itself. In fact, it seems to be one of the principles involved in the approach of religious studies, that if both fervent followers of a religion and even militant atheists both have the capacity to become insightful students, as long as they are willing to exercise the self-discipline necessary to ensure that their own beliefs do not distort their treatment of the beliefs of others. That's sort of almost been tacit in the way we approach certainly undergraduates. Otherwise, we would tell the militant atheists they can't join, or we would tell the members of religions they can't become students, and we don't do that. The counter-argument, and this I think is that religion itself refers to a totally distinct and unique category of human experience which is beyond the comprehension of those who have not shared this experience. So in this regard, and of course we've heard this term in one of the papers, the technical term to speak of religion as autonomous, a subject with its own laws, is to refer to it as being sui generis. The implications of that view have certainly been laid out by a number of the founding scholars of the study of religion, Otto, for example, and I could go on naming them. If that's the case, then there are very severe limits to the extent to which religion can be understood by the outsider who has not known what Otto would consider intrinsically religious feelings. Yet, we should be aware of the implications of rejecting the sui generis argument. In doing so, we've made a statement about the nature of religion for the purposes of study, that it's possible to study the religion in exactly the same way as you can study any other aspect of human experience. On the other hand, those who view religion as sui generis face the problem of identifying what actually makes it so, which, given the varied forms of religion, is really not easy. And also of convincing us that a person who has experienced one form of religion may apply this experience in the analysis of another. Immediately we engage with this question, as students of religion, we encounter another variation of the insider-outsider dichotomy. One that is maybe more fierce in its polemics than the old dichotomy of religious membership. The difference of opinion between those who hold to the sui generis view of religion and those who share the position of most social scientists engaged in the study of religion is profound. To resolve this issue, I do not engage with the truth claims of religion, and I observe that religion is a primal category of existence for most believers. But it's quite interesting because those who hold to a hardline social science view in the study of religion, where there's nothing intrinsically different about religion as a human phenomenon than any other human phenomenon, have a term for those scholars who hold to the view that religion is sui generis. They call us religionists. And as religionists, in a sense, we are included within our own academic community as insiders with those that we study. And there are certainly some hardline scholars of religion who are social scientists who call me a theologian, a term that I would find problematic in everything that I do. Coming now quickly to, of course, we've covered the issue of reflexivity, and I mean, I think Fiona Bowen, the anthropologist, have done so much work on this. And in her text, she reminds us that any account of a religion is a translation of one language to another, from one symbolic system to another, and there is a three-way encounter going on between the people studied, the scholar, and the intended audience. Thus, there's a problem of translation, and no account of any other's cultural experience can be value-free or objective. And all such accounts will reflect the agenda of the observer and the quality of access to other people's ways of thinking and being, filtered through life history, prior experience, conscious or unconscious intention. And we need to be aware of that. We do. And reflexive anthropology immediately undermines the fly-on-the-wall approach, and it's understood that the observer's position is going to direct and delimit what is observed. The homogeneous other will interfere with the encounter, and in this regard, the breaking down of emic and etic boundaries provides a more holistic approach, and reflexivity becomes the modus operandi of the student of religion. As explained by Helen Calloway, a dialogical methodology which rejects the division between subject and object places the self within the field of investigation, evaluates positionality and power relations, and creates an intersubjective matrix for knowledge. The other issue, it seems to me, is the issue of identity, and one of the things I scribbled down when I think the first lecture, and I scribbled down recognition of self, and I put down the question, what is self in any one situation or any one moment in time? So my own thoughts have certainly been influenced by such deliberations, but also by my own concerns not to essentialize religions in the study of religion. And it seems to me that this is crucial in the study of Islam. It would seem to me that insider and outsider are in themselves essentialized categories of identity, and neither of them takes us very far. If we accept that identity is situational and complex, rather than a rigid compartmentalization of being, which is problematic because that kind of way of looking at self can feed into racist discourse and the language of othering, then the dichotomy of insider and outsider begins to dissolve into a series of questions. And I just jotted down some of them, and I could probably develop something around this if I was to, write further on this. But the questions I put down were, when am I an insider? In what situations am I an insider? When am I an outsider? And in what situations am I an outsider? Which identity construct is operating at any one time when I consider myself an insider or an outsider? Who am I? Very perennial question, and a very ancient one. How is Islamic identity constructed? How is Muslim identity constructed? How is non-Muslim identity constructed? How is non-Muslim identity constructed to the Muslim? And so on. And you can just go on and on endlessly, I think. And you immediately begin to see a breakdown beginning to occur. Primary, and it seems to me, I was reading back through Sophie's very, very good article that she gave me for my first edition of Fieldwork in Religion, when she talks about her non-access to Deobandi Darul Ulooms. Now, I'm not bragging, but I have access. And not only in India, but also now in Britain. And it's a very interesting point, because when I started to think about, and I might be wrong, and Sophie might want to have this conversation afterwards, it seems to me that what became primary in the issue of her non-access and my access was not an issue of Muslimness, it was an issue of gender. So different identities will take on different significance in different times and places. One of the interesting ones for me in terms of identity, and I often think about it, when I first got access to Deoband, I like old world ways of doing things. And religions kind of operate in the modern world, and they also operate with tradition. And once when I was in Tunisia, I wanted to enter a mosque that had been founded by one of the companions of the Prophet in Kairouan, which quite rightly, and I think quite sensibly, the people who looked after that site were not allowing the tourist coaches to enter. And these tourist coaches were pulling up, sort of every half an hour and offloading Italians or French or whatever. They were only allowed to go into the outer courtyard. They weren't allowed to go into the inner mosque, and also there was a tomb there as well, so they certainly weren't allowed to go into. But I did want to go into it. So I decided, rather than being one of these coach people, which I knew was not going to get me anywhere, I would take the old-fashioned way of doing it, which was just to sit cross-legged outside and wait there until somebody asked me what did I want. You know, and eventually, as coach after coach went out, past, and disappeared, he realized I wasn't one of them, and he came and he said, "What is it you want?" And I said, I would consider it a great privilege to see a mosque that was founded by one of the companions of the Prophet. And he said, "How long will you sit here?" I said, "Until such time as you allow me in." And he said, "When will you eat?" I said, that's not very important to me. What's important to me is I would really like to see this." He said, "Come on, I'll take you in." So there's a kind of, in a sense, working with worlds, but not because you're doing it because you want to. It's a strategy for access, but because you do have respect for what is in there, and it's a sacred space, and you know that there are very old and traditional ways of engaging with sacred space in Hindu worlds and Islamic worlds and so on. But coming back to my access to Deoband, when it's the last little story I'll tell, and then I'll finish. But I arrived in the middle of the night in Deoband. I didn't tell them I was coming because I knew if I sort of got in touch with a small town in India where nobody knew me from Adam, and and sort of said, "I want to come and visit your Dar Uloom," I mean, they probably wouldn't even bother to answer, let alone say yes or no. So I decided I would just turn up. And I got off a train in the middle of the night. It was actually 1 o'clock in the morning when I got off the train. And I grabbed a rickshaw and said to the rickshaw, "Well, can you take me?" I didn't even know where the Dar Uloom was. They couldn't take me to Deoband Dar Uloom. And we ended up going through some very, very dark streets and sort of packs of wild dogs. Anyone's familiar with Indian villages or small town India. And in the middle of the night, I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black. And we arrived at a gate, and a conversation took place in Urdu between my rickshawwala and the gatekeeper. And then the doors opened. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know if I was at a hotel, if I was at Deoband, where I was. Anyway, I was called in, and I was taken to a room, and it had a bed. And the bed, after a lot of traveling, seemed a wonderful place to be. So I kind of collapsed into the bed, and in the morning, 2 young Muslims came to meet me just after prayer. And lo and behold, there you are in Deoband, this Dar Uloom, in the absolute backwoods of Muslim India, and these 2 lads were from Bradford. So we were on common ground, okay? I was studying at Leeds University at the time, so we had a meeting point. And I recognized the accent. So I explained what I wanted to do. I wanted to stay in the Dar Uloom. So they were kind of smart, and they said, "Well, actually, if we take you to the principal and ask permission, and if he says no, you're out, mate. You know what I mean? You're on your bike. But if we take you to the Sheikh al-Hadith, who's been here for many, many, many years, he's really respected by the principal, and if he says yes, then you'll be able to go to the principal. Maybe he'll even take you to the principal." So anyway, I said, "Well, okay, fine." He said, "But if he says no, we've still got the principal." Because we've got a double bite at the cherry, which seemed like good northern pragmatism. So anyway, off I go to the Sheikh al-Hadith, and the Sheikh al-Hadith, wonderful man, dead now. He'd been in Deoband Dar Uloom since he was a little boy. He'd been a little boy, a youth, a student, then a teacher, and then finally Sheikh al-Hadith of Deoband. And he sat me down and he quizzed me. I mean, he grilled me for about 40 minutes as a human being. And then he said, "I've got a problem, and my problem is," he said, "I can let you stay for 3 days, but as a researcher that won't get you very far." He said, "But our rule here that only someone who is a Muslim can stay for longer than 3 days." And he said, "And I think for you to do your work, you're going to need to stay longer than 3 days." So I kind of looked at him and I said, "Are you going to ask me to kind of recite the Shahada here?" You know what I mean? And he said, "No." He said, "But we need to compromise this one so I can go to the principal, and the principal will break the 3-day rule." So he looked at me and he said, "Ron, And he was a very powerful kind of, spiritually very powerful man. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, Ron, would you accept that there are divine truths in the Quran? I said, I'm absolutely happy, to say that. I said, I've read them, I've been inspired by them, I felt them in my own heart. He said, would you accept then that if there's divine wisdom and divine truths in the Quran, would you accept then that the messenger who delivered that Quran was a messenger from God? I said, I'm very happy to accept that. He said, okay then, you're a Muslim. And, he said, we can overwrite it. I'll take the principal and we'll ask the principal to. And I stayed for several weeks and I got to know that particular Sheikh al-Hadith very, very well. Which, he was very good at pragmatic wisdom of that kind. But afterwards I began to think, because while I was there, since he had kind of made me a temporary Muslim, if such a thing can exist, how should I behave then in that situation? Because now I had a temporary identity in which the Sheikh al-Hadith said, you can stay in this place for more than 3 days, but we've kind of reconstructed you as a Muslim, based on these two statements. And I realized then I had to change my behavior. So, because in terms of the student body, and so I joined prayer. In fact, in every way, I joined the Dear Blood Life for the time I was there. And then it sort of begged a question on me afterwards, because I suddenly thought to myself afterwards, I don't think there's anything Islamically correct that you can actually make someone a Muslim temporarily. It's nowhere said it. I don't think you'll find something in the Sharia that says someone can be a Muslim for 3 weeks. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, right, what does this mean in terms of myself? And I think this is what I mean about identity being very complex when you're a researcher. Do I still have to engage, in a sense, with that open admission before that man in a very honest moment that I accepted the Quran as a revelation, and I accepted Muhammad as the one who brought that revelation? In which case, how much of a Muslim am I? Even though I haven't, sort of, would Allah accept my temporary Muslim identity on the Day of Judgment? Goodness, what I mean? Huge questions start to arise. But it seems, and all of these things throughout my experience as a researcher, in a sense, have informed this whole issue of, I don't like this arbitrary insider-outsider division. At bottom line, a human being is a human being, and the bottom line of a human being for me is behaving in a way that makes a human being a human being. I happen to believe that behaving in a way that I remember someone in India who was a mother of a teacher I knew. He was actually a Hindu teacher, but I remember her saying to me, many people in human bodies, but real human beings are very few. And to me, being a real human being is about an ethical code, ethical behavior, behaving with others in that old golden rule of, do unto others as you would want to be done to yourself. And that, it seems to me that these golden rules can be brought to inform our code of behavior as researchers, and inform this whole issue of outsider, insider, from not just an anthropological division, but a human concern, and how we behave with each other in the field seems to me has to be governed by ethical behavior, which is not just ethical behavior because our universities say this is the ethics test, but ethical behavior because we want to uphold those kind of ethical standards in our professional lives. So I'll finish there.